guys, this video is going to go on our Buying a House in Japan playlist. It was triggered by one of our patrons on Patreon asking some questions about buying an investment in Japan. So first suggestion would be to have a look at the other videos on the Buying a House in Japan playlist, because a lot of the topics we've covered there would also relate to buying an investment property as well. In particular, when we bought our house, it was one of the things that we were thinking about was the investment potential of it, because obviously it's one of the biggest expenses we ever have in our life, isn't it, buying a house? So we wanted to make sure that it was a safe investment as well as being a comfortable thing to do, you know, living in your own place. So a lot of the things on that buying a house in Japan playlist would also apply to buying an investment place. So then getting to some of the questions he asked, first of all, in case we'll try and cover lots of things with this so that in the future when people ask this question, because now and again people do ask this question, so I'll try and cover as much as we can in 28 minutes or less. So the first one is that anybody from anywhere can come and buy a house in Japan. That's not a problem. The way the law works, you can just arrive in Japan and buy a house. That's not a problem at all. Usually the biggest hurdle for most people is the money. If you turn up with a suitcase full of money or a bank transfer, you know, a few $100,000 or something, and you've got the cash, you can buy anything you want in Japan, basically. Freehold, no problem at all. If you don't have the money and you need to borrow the money, then that's probably going to be your first hurdle. You usually need about, it depends on the lending institution, of course, but it's an average of between about 10 and 20%, depending on your income, because these things usually, you know, if you've got a really high income, then they might let you borrow on a lower deposit, but usually it's around 10 and 20%. As far as the lending institutions, probably the most English friendly, they're not 100% English friendly, but the most English friendly and foreigner friendly bank is probably Shinsei Bank. They're actually keen for foreign customers, and they're pretty good. They're pretty good to deal with. But they usually only lend money on a home that you're going to live in. So if you're going to buy an investment here and intend to live in it, then you can probably get a loan from Shinsei Bank if you've got the right deposit and the right income. Their terms are usually fairly competitive, and their expectations are usually fairly competitive as well. Usually here, 10-20% deposit minimum, sometimes it's more depending. Usually the banks will expect you to have some sort of permanency here, so you need permanent residency, or you need to be married to a Japanese person, or you need some sort of long-term sort of prospects here that you can prove to them that you can stay here long-term. Percentage rates, usually at the moment, they obviously vary year to year, but at the moment they're between about 1.5%, 2.5%, 3%, so between about 1.5% and 3%, which is pretty amazing, isn't it? Compared to some countries, it's ridiculously cheap. So if you can get through all that, if you do have permanent residency, or you are married to a Japanese person, or you have a guarantor, it's a pretty big ask, so it has to be somebody that you're pretty well connected with for them to guarantee your loan. But if you have a Japanese person who's prepared to guarantee your loan, you might be able to get a loan through just a normal bank here. It's possible. So it's worth looking at if you fulfill the requirements. It's always worth asking with all these things. It's worth giving it a shot. They can only say no. So it's always worth giving it a shot and see what happens. If you're connected, I mean, this is one of the reasons we make all those how-to videos about behaving the right way here, because if you're connected and people have sort of trust in you and respect for you, you have a much better chance with stuff like this, you know. So always worth giving the different banks a shot. There's also, as far as investment concerned, there's also a government operated bank that's owned by the government that's specifically to loan money to foreigners, not to foreigners, to people in making investments. So it's something like the Japan Investment Bank or something like that, but it belongs to the government. If I can remember it, I'll put a link down underneath this video. But it actually operated by the government. Their interest rates are really competitive. It's a really simple process to get the loan, because some of the banks you've got to have a lot of patience. We've talked about this before. You got to have back again and again. Whereas that that government bank can actually be really easy to deal with. You might be able to get away with going there once or twice and get the loan and it's done. And their rates are competitive and their expectations are competitive. It's part of a government initiative to try and encourage investment, you know, either business investment or land investment or something to keep the economy going. So it's a recent thing. It's well worth looking at if you can do that. Ideally, you're going to need for this whole process either a really good level of Japanese or somebody who can help you as a really good level of Japanese. Accountants are good if you can get a good English speaking accountant or an accountant you can communicate with, that you can get involved in this process. It definitely makes it easier. So that's your first step. As far as what to buy, I mean, you've got to be so careful at the moment because there's negative population growth. There are a lot of empty old houses around the place, and there's going to be a lot more empty old houses around the place, which means you'd have to be really careful not to buy somewhere where you're going to end up with a lot of empty old houses, because obviously the land isn't going to increase in value much if you're in that sort of circumstance. So you've got to look really carefully at where you buy. I mean, it's the same as any country, isn't it? You've got to be careful where you buy an investment, but it's probably even more so in Japan at the moment, because some areas are growing pretty well and are growing quite well, and their prices are bound to go up. Some areas of Japan, you'll be amazed how cheap they are. You know, those of you who've had a look at that Buying a House in Japan playlist, I mean, we've seen houses for cheapest house we saw that you could live in was $20,000. The Yakuman Inn. So it was $20,000 and you could live in it. It didn't have any parking, but you could live in it. So, you know, you can buy some extremely cheap places here. But you've got to be careful. You've got to buy somewhere where it's going to be a safe investment, where it's going to be desirable later. And this is a thing to remember. I've been watching recently on Facebook, there's a particular website in Japan, English website, that is obviously paid by a real estate company to promote their real estate investments, to try and sell houses to foreigners. And you can see what they're doing. They're finding these old houses that are livable, that are cheap. They're $150,000 or $200,000 or $120,000. And so a person that's just come to Japan is going to go, wow, look at that, what a bargain, and buy it. But the problem is, you've got to remember that you're going to have to resell it. And most Japanese people, as we've talked about before, don't want to live in an old house. And some of the people that are buying them are sort of paying top dollar, and they're going to get stuck with them because they're going to have a really hard time selling them. So really, you've just got to really look at the price of the land. Really is the safest way to look at it. You've got to look at what the value of the land is in the area competitively. And if it's got an old house on it, you've got to work out what it costs to demolish that old house and deduct that from the value of the land. So if you think the land's worth competitively $150,000 and you think it's going to cost $20,000 to demolish the house, then pay $130,000 for it. Even if your plan is to buy the place and renovate it and live in it or whatever, or rent it out, you know, you might be planning on renting it out. One of these guys recently was talking about renting out to other foreigners, and we know a guy that did that in Kyoto. He bought some old places and did them up and rented them out to foreigners, like an Airbnb style thing, and he did reasonably well out of them, but only because he didn't pay much for them. He bought them really, really cheaply, he renovated them himself, then he rented them out to foreigners. This is before Airbnb even existed. Got some good rent from them. Had a few hassles because he was renting to foreigners who, some of them would skip off owing rent and leaving the place a mess and things like that. But overall, he got good rent out of them year by year. And then when he left Japan, he sold them off for a little bit more than what he'd paid for them, and did reasonably well out of that as well. So he was ahead. But you've got to be, as with any investment anywhere in the world, you've got to be careful how much you pay for it. Because, you know, some of these ones that I've seen advertised through these websites in Japan, English websites in Japan, they're too much. They're too much. They're valued at the land plus the improvements, which it doesn't work here. It doesn't work here because when you come to sell it, the Japanese person who looks at buying it, if it's in a good location, and this is the key, when we've got all these old houses that are empty in Japan, we've showed you lots of them before too, they're cheap as chips. They're really cheap, you know, and nobody wants them. Which means when you come to sell yours, you're competing with that. And if there's an old house on there, the Japanese people are going to just want to demolish it and build a new house on there. And they're only going to do that if it's in a good location. So obviously you need to be in a good location. You need to be up high somewhere well above sea level, because the tsunami thing's in people's minds a lot recently. So you want to be above sea level, you know, 10, 12, 15 meters above sea level at least. You want to be close to a train line if you can, because they like that too. Not always possible, of course, depending on where you are. But if it's a choice, if it's an option, you want to try and be near the train line. You just want to be in a desirable location that people are going to want to build a new house on. One hint might be, are there other new houses being built very close by? If there are, that's probably a good sign. Because if you buy it in some out-of-the-way place that they're not going to want to live in, they're not going to build a new house in, then nobody's going to want it and you're going to be stuck with it, which is really bad. While we're on the topic too, so basically it comes down to the place only being worth the value of the land, which means that an apartment really has no land at all, does it? And that's the other thing we're seeing promoted on the internet here too, is they're trying to sell foreigners apartments as investments, and they're saying, look at this amazing apartment in Tokyo that you can buy for 300,000 and it's guaranteed rent and it's got this and this, and you know, great investment. Probably not, cause for the same reason that other Japanese people don't want to live in an old place, which means every year that goes by it's less and less desirable for people to live in. And eventually what will happen, and you know, with apartment buildings, everything's decided by the body corporate. So a bunch of old dudes probably will be sitting around a table deciding what to do. And at some stage, they're going to decide to demolish the place, you know. And so buying an apartment as an investment in Japan is a scary, scary thought. I can't even... It seems like a crazy idea. It really does. Just hard to imagine how you're going to come out ahead. And of course, they'll tell you that you will. Oh yeah, it's really cheap, and you know, you can rent it out and make money from the rent, and then you can sell it. Probably not. Probably not. You know, of course, the maths is different. If you're going to live in it, it's the same as with these old houses. If you're going to live in it, in the old house, or live in the apartment, well, there's slightly different maths involved, because you're not going to be paying rent, are you? You're going to be, you know, living in there instead, which means that whatever you would have paid in rent, you can sort of, you know, deduct from whatever the costs are of owning the place. But even then, you know, you'd be better off buying an old house on a piece of land outside Tokyo somewhere that's within, you know, 45 minutes by train. Or do something like that, and get a decent piece of land in a good location with an old house on it. That'd be safer. That'd be much safer. And then, you know, live there and commute. If you've got to commute into Tokyo or Osaka or Nagoya or wherever, commute in every day for 45 minutes. You know, it'd be worth it. It'd be worth it in the long term, because if you buy an apartment in one of the big cities, you know, anything new, and this goes for a house or an apartment, as soon as you buy it, it starts devaluing straight away. I mean, there's some countries where the increase in the value is faster than the depreciation of the building itself. So you can still end up ahead, you know, and you can end up with an old house that's really valuable. It's quite common. Whereas in Japan, it's not. You know, the old house with lots of character. We showed you lots of those on that Buying a House in Japan playlist. That houses that we love, you know, we look at it and go, oh, isn't it excellent, you know? We showed you that old building recently, and lots of people go, oh, wow, isn't that wonderful? What could you do to that? And that's how we react to it. But Japanese people don't. They go, oh, it's old, it's a worry, it's a problem. You got to keep, you know, we don't want it. So, and you can't rely on the other thing that those guys were saying is, oh, you know, you can always sell it to another foreigner when you decide to leave, but not necessarily. Not a smart one. So yeah, that would be based on what we've seen over, you know, the time that we've been following the real estate goings on here. You know, buy something in a good location only for the value of the land less the cost of demolishing whatever's on it, and location. I mean, it's always the case, isn't it, anywhere in the world when you buy something, it's got to have a good location, but even more so here. Be really careful where it is, and research really well what the going rates are in the area. You can usually work it out per square meter what people are paying, and then don't pay any more than that. You know, and you could get ahead, because really the prices here in a lot of areas are low. They are pretty low. And if you buy in a good location that's desirable, and there are growing areas here where, you know, where and you can soon see, if you drive around an area and you're seeing lots of new houses and lots of like brand new houses and brand new commercial buildings, and you know, if you get an area like that that's really healthy, then that's probably a safe place to be. You know, some place in the middle of nowhere with a lot of empty houses and nothing new at all is probably not going to be a good investment. And again, with all of these, we've got to be looking long term. You know, to think about coming here, renovate a place, and then sell it off. And few people have said that when they've watched our videos. You know, can't you buy one of these old houses and do it up and sell it? No, probably not. No one's going to want it. You're going to throw your money away doing that. You know, really the only way to look at an investment here in Japan is long term. Just one more thing too. This other guy mentioned the Olympics. As far as investment, or as far as any sort of business at all, probably relying too heavily on the Olympics. Of course, there's going to be opportunities because of the Olympics, and there will be money to be made by some people probably, but the Olympics are so short, aren't they? You know, there'll be a bit of time before the Olympics, before the event itself, where there'll be a bit of demand for places to rent and things like that. And then, of course, during the Olympics, there'll be big demand for places to rent. And then after, there'll be still, because there's the people that help organise it, and there's the people here after it's over. So there'll be, you know, a bit of increased demand before the event, huge demand during the event, and a little bit of increased demand after the event, and then it'll go back to normal. So probably not a lot of long-term prospects, and probably, if anything, the demand for the value to buy and sell the land around the Olympic areas will probably drop after the Olympics, won't it? Obviously, because you know, it's over then, isn't it? So yeah, wouldn't rely too heavily on the Olympics. Probably consider that to be a bit of a bonus if it happens, sort of thing. You'd be better off not putting that maths into your decision making at all, really. In actual fact, buying anywhere near the Olympics, you're probably too late, because probably as soon as they found that, you know, Tokyo got the 2020 Olympics, the smart investor guys were probably out buying up all the relevant land anyway. And then every time they've made an announcement since then, they've probably, you know, every time they found out that there's a new venue coming, they've probably bought it up straight away. So you're probably too late for that anyway. So probably wouldn't want to get into that. That's probably a bit of a risky business anywhere near the Olympic venues, probably. Again, better off just staying in areas that are healthy and doing well, but not relying too heavily on anything, really. You've got to be so careful, as with anywhere you invest, don't you? But probably even more so here for those reasons. So anyway, it might be time to invest in a new car. Automatic car freezing at traffic lights isn't good, is it? Okay, so hopefully that answered the questions for that particular person, and for anybody else who's been thinking about the same thing, because we do get asked this now and again, so this might have helped anyway. Hopefully I might help somebody. More videos coming soon.